Here we go. So guys, thank you everyone who's tuned in. My name is Sean and I run the account, and we are here with the amazing, fabulous, brilliant Ken Reed, who I will allow to introduce himself in just a moment. But before we do, I want to thank everyone for tuning in, and I want to thank the people who sent in questions. We're going to tackle a lot of them today. Just so everyone is a little bit familiar, Ken is a gay relationship and dating coach. We connected a few weeks ago. He's fantastic and insightful, and we have just so much to talk about today. But I am actually going to throw it to him so that he can better explain what he does and also introduce himself. So Ken, let's start with this. Ken, tell us your name, what you do for a living, and also how you got involved in this field.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. I think I can answer all of that because it all ties in together. So I am a relationship coach that specializes for gay men. I help my clients delete their dating apps by boosting their self-esteem and communication skills to find open, honest, and committed partners. Now, how I got into the space was a series of events. I did not think I was going to be a relationship coach. I was originally a marketing manager. I was not enjoying my life in the 9-to-5 grind at all. I had my heart broken by a man who I loved very, very much at the beginning of 2019. And I think this is something that a lot of guys, and even to an extent girls, can relate to, you know, falling in love with someone who felt and acted like they were a boyfriend, and really being at the height of that honeymoon period when my heartbreak happened really made me feel absolutely gutted. And it took me a real 6 good months to get over that. And it was really, 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 really hard. So in that process of going to therapy, trying to figure out how to recover myself by going online, looking at like all the things about, you know, how to heal after heartbreak, whilst also trying to figure out what the red flags were that I clearly missed in that particular situation I was with this guy.
Right.
And I realized a few things, one of which was there was very limited to no information specifically for gay men when it came to dating. A lot of it is for straight men and women. And whilst there are similarities between us and straight men and women, we also have unique challenges that they simply do not share. So with that in mind, it also got to a point where at the end of last year, a colleague just made a very innocent comment. She was like, "You really seem to like relationships. Why don't you go into psychology?" And that sort of just clicked a bit of an aha moment for me. A light bulb went off and I thought, well, I don't really like the idea of doing stats, which is something we do here in Australia. If you're studying psychology, you have to really go in depth into that. So I thought, well, why don't I invest in counseling instead to learn therapies and teachings for how to help people one-on-one? And then from there, it evolved into coaching because I didn't need to have the same level of, I suppose, legalities around it. I can give my clients the direction they need, like a personal trainer. And since I started in July this year, during the middle of the pandemic, I have not looked back. I love it. And it's been such a fulfilling experience, not only for me, but also for my clients who've gotten amazing results.
Absolutely. So I know you and I have spoken over the past couple of weeks about topics we want to cover. And originally I was thinking that we can bring up like a handful of topics and sort of extrapolate from there. But I actually received so many good questions that touch on so many of the topics that you and I were discussing. So I feel like we should just get right into those. These are questions sent in by different followers, mostly gay and bisexual men, questions about dating within the realm of the gay community. So the first question I want to ask, and this actually is one that I'm curious about, what is the difference between a therapist and a dating or relationship coach?
Great question. So when you come to a therapist or a counselor, you're typically not going there to talk about a very specific issue, like, for example, relationships. You might go there to talk about general things like, you know, usually when people are stuck in life and they're looking for help, they could be grappling with a number of different challenges, but they're not really sure what the actual problem is.
Mm-hmm.
And so the counselor is really just there to sit, listen, reflect back what the client is saying, essentially, and then to develop an action plan with them. But it's very much to empower the client to do it on their own. Whereas as a coach, I offer accountability and I also offer a lot of direction with what I do. So if I'm with a client, I may talk about, you know, how their upbringing impacted their relationships and how that's all entwined.
Mm-hmm.
But I also add into that coursework that allows my clients to have an understanding as to the kind of man they want to be with, and also how they can better themselves in dating. We audit their dating, or I audit their dating profile and also help them into better understanding what mistakes they might be making in order to achieve a loving relationship.
Right. So a lot of what you're saying is when you're dealing with someone, when you're meeting with a dating coach, they might help you identify patterns and provide you with tangible ways to break those patterns.
That's exactly right.
Got it. Got it. What would you say for gay guys, bisexual men, any guy whose eventual goal is to have another loving relationship with a man, in the gay community, what are the biggest challenges people might face in dating?
Oh, wow. There's a lot. I think a lot of it comes down to misunderstanding the way we've been brought up. So I think there's a few things. If I had to name the top 3 things, I think that a lot of gay men, they aren't aware of how much their upbringing impacts their relationships. So for instance, if I worked with a client whose, you know, family were divorced and this didn't seem to him to relate necessarily to the way he was interacting with other guys in dating. Turns out he said to me very early on that he said to me continuously, I don't want to let other people down. And what he meant by that was he felt the need to control his relationship. So like when he was dating, he had to know where it was going. And when we worked through that, it was because he felt like he didn't have any control over his mum and dad splitting up. So as a consequence, he always felt the need to know what was going on with his relationships. And that really caused him to suffer a lot. So that's an example of how his own behavior stemmed from upbringing. Second thing I think is for a lot of gay men, we have a lot of shame. So one of our biggest ones that's completely unique to us is being closeted. So for those guys who are out there who don't know this expression, if you're a closeted gay man, you're a guy who, you know, is still very ashamed of who you are, then you are going to be someone who is not very comfortable being with a gay partner because you reject so much of yourself and you're going to push that onto your partner. So that's a huge challenge. And then finally, I think there is a real issue for our community when it comes to stereotypes, meaning like, oh, we have to, you know, be a certain sexual position in order to have a partner, top or bottom. We have to be, you know, we have to have the body of a Greek god. And the reality is that all of these are really nice to haves. They're not actually essential to creating a fulfilling, meaningful relationship. So I think what people need to stop doing is looking at all the shopping list of features they want out of a guy and actually start getting down to the core of what are my values and what kind of partner is compatible with my values and also my interests.
So values and interests are really the things that people should assess rather than necessarily the physical traits or even the social traits. Like I want him to like mountain biking or I want him to love Broadway. Those are things that might be nice and might be commonalities, but you're saying you really have to focus on core values and interests, what lights you up, right?
Yeah, and to complement what you're saying, Sean, I think that whilst it's very important to be attracted to our partners, the trick can be sometimes that if we are, you know, so blinded by how good looking they are, because sometimes all we really want to do is just sleep with them because they are that good looking.
Yeah, of course.
We think that chemistry rush can make us think sometimes, oh, it's true love because I'm getting the butterflies and I'm feeling really connected with this person and oh, the chemistry and the connection is great. No. that is just a sign that you're physically attracted to your partner. You're probably a bit nervous. You're reacting to his nervousness. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are made for one another and you're going to have a loving relationship. So it's really about making sure you've got a fine balance between someone who you like, who you can physically enjoy and romantically, whilst also you can see there's a foundation of friendship there too.
Well, I think you're onto something here, because I hear so many people say they're looking for that spark. And what you're saying is the spark is really just an initial attraction. It's not really about compatibility.
Correct.
Right. Okay. So I want to get right into the questions, because we have actually, throughout the week, I've been prompting people. I've been telling them that we're going to talk today and that you're willing to answer some of their questions. And without using names or locations for today, we are just going to go through some of these questions that they've asked. A lot are about what we've touched on already. Even more are about what you and I discussed privately beforehand. And I'm going to start with, this one was really interesting to me. And this guy says, not being fully out to his friends and family is a non-negotiable for me. Am I being insensitive?
So I'm going to assume that means that this gentleman would like to have a partner who is out of the closet and has spoken to his family. Yeah. Are you being picky? Absolutely not. If that's your non-negotiable, I think that's perfectly fine. And my reason for that being is it goes back to that comment that I was making before about being closeted. You know, if you're working with a partner who's ashamed of himself, you know, that's like a partner who's ashamed of having a right arm, and you've got a right arm. Oh man, you're going to be hearing for days why your right arm is no good, because he's already hating his own. So if you've got a gay guy who's, you know, not necessarily out and is also not having that talk with his family, it's not being picky to say you don't want to be with him. That's absolutely fine. I think it means that you want someone to be at your level. So I think that's a perfectly valid thing to say.
But what about, like, I'm sure you've experienced this too. Coming out is really, it's a process. And for many people, it's a lifelong journey. There's some people that come from a culture where it's not as accepting as others. Like, you know, for example, I grew up in an interesting situation. Like, my mom's family was very Americanized. My dad comes from the Soviet Union. And for a long time, I was not allowed to tell my grandparents that I'm gay. I mean, I think it's wildly obvious and apparent, but I still had to conceal that at dinner tables. And I had to deal with a lot of, you know, having to come up with excuses why I wasn't dating anybody or why I wasn't married. So what about, you know, sort of these nuanced situations where, like, maybe someone isn't fully out? Is it still acceptable, or is it still okay for someone to be like, that's a non-negotiable for me, I need you fully out? Or is it really about, as you said, being at the same level?
That is a great question, Sean. And I think really what the person is asking is two things. They're looking for someone who is at the same level as them in terms of, like, not being ashamed of who they are.
Right.
But also they're looking for transparency and honesty, because when you have to hide yourself to other people, then you're being deceitful. Like, by design, you are being deceitful because you are hiding yourself from other people. I'm not calling you out as a liar. I'm not calling you out as someone who's necessarily a inherently deceitful human being, but to an extent you've had to hide part of yourself. So the question might become, well, if you're hiding this from your family, what else are you hiding from other people in life too? So I think as long as an individual is aware of those actions and is also willing to take responsibility whilst they're in the relationship. So say, for example, you know, I was dating a guy who I knew hadn't come out to his family, and he was very, very, very aware of why he was doing it, because his family were incredibly abusive. They, you know, it's not safe for him to be out with that family. And he explained the reasons why, and generally, you know, and was very accepting and loving of being, you know, amongst the gay community, I think that would be a perfect compromise.
Okay. Okay. I get what you're saying. And, you know, maybe like we all have to sort of like, you know, we all have to assess the situations because, yeah, we've seen a lot of change over the past 5-10 years. But like, even I'm 32, I remember there was a time when being out in the workplace wasn't necessarily a popular thing. I feel like it's evolved tremendously, but
Oh yeah.
I guess, you know, I think what you're saying is this conversation has to be had, you know, between two partners to evolve together and successfully. And my hope is that as time goes on, more and more people can be out and proud throughout the world. But yeah, I understand that there's definitely people who are in different, more limiting situations, and I think the best they can do is be open about communication.
Absolutely. And I think that we have to acknowledge too that being out is not always safe for every single person.
Very
I
good
think
point.
it's real. Yeah, it's down to the way in which I think that is communicated with your partner. Like if you, like I said, I think if you've got a partner who's very open and communicative about it and explains the circumstances of it and doesn't seem to have, you know, and more importantly, doesn't bother you. Like, you know, you're happy with them and they're not insulting you or, you know, aggravating you with their closeted behavior.
Right.
I don't see any reason as to why that should be a deal breaker.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think that answers that question really nicely. The next question we have is why, and I will tell you, we get letters about this topic all the time. It's probably one of the most common things our followers complain about or write about. It's ghosting. And this person, I know. And we've all been there constantly, too many times. But the question they have is, why do gay men in particular love ghosting so much?
I'm going to answer that by saying it's not that gay men inherently love ghosting. It's that gay men don't know how to communicate that they don't want to be with you. So we all think that we're good at socializing, but it does not mean that we're good at communicating. So one thing I teach my clients is if you want to reject a guy, or you want to say, you know, it's basically in a nutshell.
Okay.
It was lovely to meet you. I really enjoyed spending time with you. I'm not really feeling the connection here. I wish you well.
Okay.
And that's neither needy nor rude, but here's the click, is that when you've got someone who's worried about hurting someone's feelings because they've invested so much time, they're scared of drama, they don't like confrontation because they think that means conflict. They're going to think, oh, well, maybe it's just better if I don't tell them because, you know, that way I won't hurt their feelings. The reality is that ghosting hurts way more than just a simple conversation or a text saying, I'm just not feeling it anymore and I really have to be honest and let you know. I appreciate the time we spent together and goodbye. Do not say you're a great person and you'll find someone amazing. That is an absolute backhanded compliment. But the thing to be mindful of is that if you don't give that closure, then it really burns not only the person, but also you, because you're going to be living with the guilt of that and the shame of that down the line. And I think that in the most general circumstances where, you know, people trying to get to know one another too, I think that what we really all can learn from is the fact that if you do have to have that conversation where you do have to reject a person, realize that if the guy that you're dating comes back to you angry that you don't want to spend time with them, that's not a reflection of you, that's a reflection of them. So I really do believe that ghosting is a very, very cheap and easy ticket out of having the hard conversations. But like all things that are new, it's uncomfortable, but man, is it liberating for both people.
I can imagine that. Now, here's a question though. So you're saying to have this conversation, to be upfront if you're not interested. Should it be something unsolicited or should it be something in response to what you read as potential interest? Like say you and I went on a date and you were not interested in me. is it appropriate for you to tell me straight off the bat, or should you wait for me to reach out and say, I had such a nice time with you?
That's a wonderful question. And my answer is, I don't think it should necessarily wait for you. I think, for instance, and I've done this before too, I've even rejected guys like there and then. And for instance, it could be as simple as, you want a relationship, I'm just looking for friends with benefits. And I might say, listen, I got to be honest with you, Sean, I've really enjoyed meeting you. I can hear from you that you're after a relationship right now because I'm about to move overseas. I'm about to do whatever. I'm really just looking for friends with benefits. I think it's best if we part ways here. I think the sooner you do it, you know, I think as soon as you know in your heart and your gut, you're like, I'm just not, I don't think this is for me. I'm feeling uncomfortable. I'm not feeling good. You owe it to yourself more than the partner to just be clear with them and say, I'm not really feeling this. So I think it shouldn't necessarily wait to be prompted. You as an individual might need a bit of time to mull it over, but I wouldn't wait over 24 hours. Give the person the time of day to respect them and just be like, I think this is the way it is.
Okay, got it. So what your advice would be is to just be as upfront as possible the moment you know where you stand.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I think that definitely answers that question. And you actually brought something up, you know, you brought up moving, which is hilarious because we got such an interesting question. This one really made me think, because obviously right now with the pandemic, there is the whole landscape of dating has changed completely. And circumstantially, things are different for everybody. This particular guy wrote to us saying, I'm moving from the United States to Canada in May. Should I even bother dating until then?
My answer is yes, because if it's something that feels good, then absolutely do it. I have tons of friends who are still dating, even though they're about to move, but they make it clear on the first date. They say, look, you know, this is where my situation's at, I'm moving. And the reason it's good is because for two reasons. One, you know, if you're on the same page as another person and are like, this is who I am, this is where I'm at, you know, if you like the sound of this, then let's see if we can work on it. You're practicing your communication skills. You're actually practicing being open and honest, and that's actually an important skill to have if you are ultimately looking for a relationship. Secondly, you know, we all are learning to be better communicators and also to enjoy ourselves as we're living in life. I see no reason as to why we shouldn't enjoy getting to connect with other new amazing men that are out there too. So to that I say, absolutely. If it's something that you want to do and you are someone who is potentially moving to another country, whether it be Canada or any other part of the globe, that's never an excuse not to do it. I think if you feel it, go for it.
Okay, so you don't have to sit back just because you know down the line there might be complications.
Absolutely. I think if anything, if you're willing to work it through it with a person, then you make the most of what you have.
I mean, you're right. You never know where it can go. Well, I think that's a great answer. And I agree with you on that. I think that like life changes all the time. Circumstances change all the time.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Why miss out on potential opportunities or partners? Like, you never know what kind of connection you can come across.
And to add to what you're saying, Sean, too, you know, we can't control life circumstances. And yes, we can say with a degree of certainty, oh, I'm moving away in 6 months to this location. Yet we know based on recent events, we're never really in control of whether we're coming or going based on, you know, pandemic or like anything else. So the only thing we can control is what we have in the moment.
Okay, I love that. The only thing we can control is what we have in the moment. Let's all write that down. That was a great question. I was so excited to talk to you about that. Here is another tremendous topic that I think many, many, many of us can relate to. Being gay and falling for a straight guy. Now,
oh God.
I've been there a handful of times, like to various degrees. Like I had very strong feelings for a friend of mine who's straight, and we actually talked about it. You know, and I sort of came out to him about my feelings, and because there was a bit of time where we had sort of lost the friendship, like the friendship sort of hibernated. And then eventually I kind of talked to him and I said, you know, I did have feelings for you. And he's straight. He was always straight. We definitely had a kinship and a connection and a friendship, but obviously I wanted more and I allowed my imagination to go a little bit wild. But this particular guy, you know, he feels pretty impassioned about it. And he writes, "How do I stop falling for straight guys? It's a real problem. It's my biggest concern. I hate it and I can't stop it." How would you respond to someone who, it sounds like this is kind of weighing on maybe his life, but definitely weighing on his relationships and his ability to meet with viable men?
You're absolutely right. And there's a few things that I can say. Firstly, listening to the story you had with your friend, I actually think you've done an amazing thing in talking to him about it, because I think, I don't know about your reaction from that, but I can tell you, anytime I've talked to a guy, gay or not, about my feelings, man, it felt like a weight lifted from my shoulders, because then at least I was like, okay, that's that knowledge out there. And if you don't, I don't know, like for example, with guys I've said that to, if they've said to me, I don't feel the same way, I'm like, thank goodness, I can move on and do things with my life. Now, when it comes to this gentleman's situation here, so you're in an environment where you keep crushing on straight guys.
Right.
There's a few things I can say about this. One thing I would say first is, what's the reason that you're allowing yourself to be crushing on straight guys?
Mm-hmm.
You know, if your environment is such that you have a lot of straight men around you, my question is that comfortable for you? Is this the environment that you particularly enjoy being with? Does it feel safe to you? Because if it does, the question then becomes, well, if you know that you're crushing on someone who cannot physically return your affection, what's the reason you're doing that? Is it because you're inherently concerned about interacting with other gay men? And if that's the case, the question is, well, what can you do in order to feel more comfortable dating other gay men in an environment that works? I actually had a client who, so here in Sydney, in our eastern suburbs, it's like a very rich area, and there's a lot of guys who are very, very blokey. They like playing rugby, they like playing football, and so he was very much in that crowd of very straight appearing men, and he was crushing on one after another. And I dug down to the bottom of like what the reason for that was, and it was because he genuinely felt safe. Like, he did not like going out and meeting other gay men, because he had this idea in his head that other gay men were somehow more effeminate, somehow more flamboyant, crazy. He had like all these images and stereotypes in his head, which was simply not accurate. So that fear of getting to connect with other gay men kept him from actually going out there. So his physical urges and his crowd were keeping him stuck. So I think, the thing that I told him was, you know, you got to be mindful of the fact that if you're allowing yourself to be in this environment, you know, whether it's by design or by choice, you know, you have to be mindful that, to put it in an analogy, it's kind of like falling in love with a pretty building that's made out of asbestos. It's not good for you.
Yeah. You know, I will tell you, just to reflect on my own experience, because I was really in love with my man. Like, I had such feelings for him, and it weighed on me because I wanted us to be together. And at the end of the day, it was just a fantasy that was sort of building in my head, and I would look for clues and I would build a case internally. I'd be like, oh, today he brought over wine. He's in love with me. Like, or we went to the beach together. Like, that was pretty romantic, right? But at the end of the day, you know, I think I was like what your friend went through. I was more excited and felt happier living out this fantasy in my head than dealing with real dating, which often involves rejection, often involves discomfort. For me, it was like, you know what I mean? It's almost like being in love with a celebrity. Like, you can like fantasize about your life together, think about what would happen if you ever met, but you can't hang all your hopes on that, because that prevents you, as you said, from interacting with real potential men.
You're absolutely right. And to complement what you're saying, Sean, too, you know, I think all it takes is one guy to connect with you in a way that you may never have experienced before. Like, you know, someone who's just showing more interest in you,
Mm-hmm.
someone who's spending time with you, giving you gifts, for that whole range of dreams to start popping up, you know, to put out, as you've called it, like, you know, you're creating hope essentially in the fantasy
Yeah.
of like getting married together, meeting a family, starting out, and you have these wild possibilities. But really, what that, I mean, look, without being critical or minimizing what you went through, you know, it's that attraction. You know, it's that whole idea of getting attracted to the idea of the person and wishing that it could necessarily go
Yeah.
into a stage beyond what's possible in reality. And I
Yeah.
think that, you know, I want to say this out of a place of kindness and compassion. I get it. I completely get it. And I think that, you know, we've all had some really bad, challenging experiences in dating with other gay guys, that if we're just exposed to one nice guy, straight or otherwise, who's spending time with us, it makes us think of all the possibilities that are capable there too. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, and
and I wouldn't
that's what
say,
I went through, and I felt like
mm,
it was the interest that kept me sort of so excited. But you know, we actually got a question. There's one guy. He wrote in a question a couple minutes ago, and he's a wonderful follower of ours. He comments all the time. He's very engaged. So I want to make sure we get to that. He wrote, and I tried to jot this down. He wrote, um, if you're friends with someone and you develop feelings for them and they are not interested in you and don't want to be your friend at that point, how do you handle that? So
that
again,
is a
it's a little bit of
phenomenal
like,
question.
okay, so you're able to understand what it is, because I know there's a few steps there. There's a few contingencies. But if you want to
Yeah.
answer and sort of recap that experience for us, that would be wonderfully helpful.
Well, I can say that because I've lived it and I know what it feels like. So, man, okay, so you basically develop feelings for a friend and you disclose that you have feelings, and the friend then comes to you and says, they do two things. They say, I'm not on the same page as you and I don't want to be your friend.
Right.
Wow. That's big.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
gotta be very painful.
It is, but your friend's also done you a blessing in disguise, which is to say, you know, I don't want this dynamic between us. And I'll explain why. You cannot be friends when you want more than friends. Because if you are seeking that individual as a lover, you are going to be driving yourself nuts down the line, because you're going to constantly be looking into the signs, reading into actions, similar to when you're dating a closeted guy. What am I talking about? When you're attracted to a closeted man, because for similar reasons, you know, you are hoping for more, and that person is never going to give that to you. So they've kind of done you a favor by saying, we need to cut this relationship now because this is not healthy for us. So what would you do then? My answer is, you want as much separation between you, memories of them, and treat this like a breakup. Because what's likely going to happen is that you'll go through typical breakup. For those of you who might not be aware or have gone through this, is very similar to post-traumatic stress disorder and withdrawal. On one hand, you are traumatized by the person who hurt you, but at the same time, you want more of what they gave you because you really felt, you know, quite positive and very excited when you were with them and very anxious when you were without them. So it's kind of like constantly beating yourself against a wall. So even little things like photos together, the music that you shared, the movies that you saw can all be triggers and reminders of the time that you shared with each other. So you want to start scaling that back, taking that away from you, and actually start investing time in yourself, doing things that you love for you, connecting with other friends that don't necessarily relate to that particular individual. Because if you're allowing yourself to stay stuck in the mind of, you know, what was, you are never going to move on beyond that.
So there's really a commonality here. And I think it's about really gaining closure from certain situations that aren't going to work out. And what I hear you saying in all these questions is, if a situation doesn't seem like it's going to work out, the most important thing is to get closure from it, and then move on? Because there's other possibilities.
I would absolutely agree with what you've said. And I think that's the power of closure, is because it doesn't keep you pining and looking for more. Because, for instance, if you've been ghosted, we talked about this earlier, you know, that's not closure. I mean, it is a form of closure, but the problem is that it kind of escapes the responsibility of actually having that closure. I'm not talking necessarily for the person who was ghosted. I actually mean for the individual who ghosted. Having that conversation with a person is liberating, because it gives you the power to actually then take that information in and move on. But if you leave the door seemingly ajar and you sort of treat it like, well, you know, potentially down the road I might want to meet them again, blah, 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 you're not allowing for healing. You're not even allowing for the potential opportunity to meet new people into your life. So that's why it needs to be shut, not bolted, because 5+ years down the line you might, you know, meet this person again under better circumstances, but don't wait around for that.
Yeah, don't wait around for them. And also don't, you know, hope can be a little bit of a dangerous thing, I think. And if you live on that hope that someone's going to change, or that someone's going to come around, or their feelings are going to evolve, I think you're setting yourself up for failure.
Oh, absolutely. And on that note, I think that we've all been conditioned by watching far too many romantic movies that there is the potential for change to happen. I will say this as a blanket statement. Each and every one of us has a capacity for change. That change, though, may be minimal or huge, but you can't control another person's change. You can only control your own journey.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. And that is a lesson that takes years to learn, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that it's very easy for us to hope that an individual might one day see our value and appreciate us. Yeah. But kind of like the person who's never tried alcohol before, you're shoving them a champagne, trying to get them to appreciate the finest Bordeaux from France. They are not going to appreciate that from day one.
Amen. Amen. So again, like the sort of takeaway from all of this is that don't allow yourself to live in the fantasy or the hope of it all. Try and see the situation for what it is. Get answers if you can. Get closure if you need to, and then move on.
I think that's a very beautiful summary for it. Because at the end of the day, time is the most valuable resource we have. Why are we giving it up for someone who's not even allowing us to enjoy our best life? Exactly.
So speaking of time, a couple of guys wrote in about with age-related questions. So these guys have questions that are sort of specific to where they're at in their lives. They're both in their 30s, and they share that with us. I'm going to start with the first one. This guy writes, I'm 32 and I haven't had a boyfriend since I was 16. Where am I going wrong?
I would say that this individual is actually being too hard on themselves. I think that it doesn't, and I think also there's not enough information there. I think I think a lot of people who are actually in relationships are terrible at relationships. Because how can you be good at something if you've never actually done it before, you know? Yeah. I think that, and I say that not out of criticism or judgment being like, oh, you know, all people in relationships are crap. No, I think that it's like starting something new. You know, we're all bad when we first started to learn how to do maths, but it was a process of evolution and growth. Yeah, I am too. I'm not going to try and invest myself in that. But I think that part of learning to be in a relationship is actually learning about how to communicate, be self-aware, and also be a team player. So to go directly back to this particular person's question, where am I going wrong? Well, I want to kindly say, you might actually be doing some very good things. You know, I think that to hold yourself accountable and say, I haven't had a serious relationship since I was 16 is a bit unfair, because, you know, you might have had plenty of interpersonal experiences that actually shaped you and given you a better picture as to the kind of guy that you want to be with.
Right.
Doesn't mean that you're necessarily bad at dating. Maybe it means that you're not picking the right guy. Maybe it means that you're not having enough exposure to good men, because some guys I know, what they'll do is they'll stick to, say, using like one dating app like Tinder, or they'll just use Grindr and think that's the way to get there.
Right.
And without necessarily making any assumptions or conclusions about what this person is doing, I think the best answer that I can say is dating is a numbers game. So you want to have more exposure to guys that share your interests and also your values. But you can't figure that out without meeting them. So the thing you want to do is have enough options to meet new people in your life, and then have that opportunity to actually interact with them, to then date them, get to know them, and then be in this process of figuring out what you like, what you don't like, and what ultimately feels good for you.
All right. So dating is a journey. Dating is a world of exploration. And I think what you're saying is that instead of going into it wondering what's wrong with me or what's wrong with them, try and neutralize and try and learn what are your values and interests, because knowing your values and interests, as you say, will actually be the most helpful tools in you finding a viable match.
Yeah, dating is actually a bit like having a mirror like shoved up your face, because it's allowing you to see who you are when you interact with other people as well, because you'll quickly figure out what you like, what you don't like. And so when you're getting a clear picture as to who you are, what you vibe off, you're going to be in a much better place to actually know the kind of partner you want to be with.
Dating is like a mirror. I had never thought about it that way, but I think you're right. I think that's a really good point. It allows you to see what you look for, what you're interested in, and sort of how you interact with people.
Exactly right.
Very nice. Again, we had another age-related question. This gentleman says, I am gay. I'm 30 years old. I want kids, but why does this seem to be a barrier for other gay men? Now, you work with a lot of gay men. Are your clients from all over the world, or are they mostly from Australia?
Great question. No, I've got a few clients from overseas.
Okay. So I don't know. I don't have the statistics on it. Like, I don't know how many gay men want kids versus how many don't. Anecdotally, from my friends and the guys I hang out with, I would say maybe 30 to 40% want to have kids, want a family, and the rest are either leaning towards no or are sort of neutral about it. But from your perspective, how many gay men want kids versus don't?
That's a great question. I think that from my perspective, and this is my lived experience, it might be different for people who are in different parts of the globe. It depends. I think that my percentage would be similar to yours, Sean. I think that there is fewer gay men in my world who want kids. I know the crowd I hang out with, including myself, we want kids because, we're at a stage where we're ready and responsible to actually have children with us. But I think part of that question was also wondering, why do gay men not want kids? And my answer would be much the same as why straight men don't want kids too. It could be for a variety of reasons. It could be that, they don't really feel like having the responsibility to look after children. They may also have had a terrible upbringing from their parents and can't think of anything worse than trying to be a father. So I think that the decision to have kids ultimately rests upon someone who is ready to accept that responsibility.
So for me, I would answer this question with another question. How can this individual find like-minded men who also want kids? Because I know they're out there. I mean, I have friends that want it for sure, but I imagine it's a little bit tougher to sift through. How can someone go about, if this is a non-negotiable, if this is someone that absolutely wants to have kids, how should he be approaching dating?
That is a wonderful question. And my answer would be, I think that it would depend on two things. The maturity of the partner that they're dating, and also whether or not they've talked about this on date one. So to talk about that quite in depth, I think you can date someone who might be 25 but has the emotional maturity of a very old person who might be like, yeah, I'd love to have kids, let's do it. But also remember too that there are probably fewer 20-year-olds, 20-pluses who want kids. So I think that you're far more likely to find someone who wants to have kids who's 30 plus onwards, because they're more at that stage where they're like, yeah, I'm ready to do that. So that's one thing to consider.
I'm going to jump in on that because I find, you know, a lot of straight women feel that you got to figure out if a man wants kids early on or not. And if he doesn't, it's very hard to change his mind. With gay men, is this something they know going into it? Or can someone at 22 or 24 not want kids, but then at 36 really want kids? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, does the answer to this question evolve within gay men, or is it sort of like you got to know straight on because that's not going to change?
Well, I think there's two parts to this. One is, why do you want to fight with someone who doesn't want kids on day one? Like, I mean, I think there's actually going to be more resistance from day one. Because if you're like, I want kids, and you keep pushing it, that person's going to be like, I don't want to deal with this person. Why do they keep wanting kids? Jesus. So they're more likely to not want to have kids. So that's, I'd say, a human response more than anything else. And, you know, I think that's regardless of whether you're straight or gay. I think no one likes to be pushed into doing something they don't want to do. So that's one thing to consider. Now, as for gay men with regards to wanting kids over time, actually, I really like what Claps and Snaps just wrote here, because I was going to say pretty much something similar. Yeah, they can. They can definitely change over time. However, the caveat to this answer is I'd say they're more likely to change by themselves in singleness, meaning like if you're with a partner and you're enjoying the lifestyle, you're comfortable with how everything is, I don't think you're necessarily going to welcome kids as readily as you might when you're single and you've actually had time to do a lot of that self-growth and development by yourself.
Right.
So I think my overall answer is the possibility is there. But again, I go back to that whole idea of what can you control? You know, you can't control another person. So the best thing you can probably do is really consider your participation in this mix. If someone's saying to you on date one, you know, the way I'd phrase it as a question is, I am interested in having a family, raising kids. What about you? What are your thoughts about this? And if they come back to you and say, I'm really not interested in the idea of having family and kids, well, it goes back to that whole discussion we had about closure. It might be like, well, listen, I think we're on two different pages. Right. So that's why it's really important. And I mean, that's if children and kids are a non-negotiable for you.
And it sounds like this is something everyone should be a little bit upfront about with, right?
Oh, yes.
This is something you should be very clear about.
Yeah, because dating, I think people are very afraid to actually talk about their needs on date one. Like I tell all my clients this, I'm saying you need to get clear as to what kind of experience you want, what you're looking for, what kind of partner you want on date one. Yeah. So I know that can be quite scary for a lot of people because they think to themselves, oh, I don't want to come across as needy. Am I going to be too flawed? No. If someone's freaks out to you because they're like, oh, this person wants me in a relationship, either one of two things have happened. You either didn't explain it in a way that necessarily sounded like an open conversation and negotiation, or the person you're with is clearly not relationship ready. So that's fine. The way I teach my clients, for instance, with this conversation would be something like, I am interested in, out of dating, I'm interested in having a long-term relationship. I'd love to hear what you're looking to get out of your dating experiences. I've had guys who've come back to me saying things like, I just want to go with the flow. Maybe we'll see where this goes and we'll get into a relationship. That answer is, I'm confused. I don't know what I'm looking for. And, quite frankly, I'm not interested in a relationship. So I think once we establish that we're both on the same page with what we're looking for, it actually allows everyone involved to actually start this process off at a much better level because you're working as team players rather than trying to mind read the other person or are scared to ever talk about your needs in the first place, which is a terrible way to start a relationship.
How do you know if and when a guy is relationship ready? Because I don't know if that's so clear to people. I mean, especially now when people can linger in that undetermined zone for months, sometimes even years. How do you know when a guy is relationship ready?
That's a wonderful question. And my answer is you can't on date one. And I know from experience this too. I've often said to guys, what are you looking to get out of this experience? And they'll say, oh, I'm looking for a long-term relationship. And then you won't hear from them for 6 days. And they'll come back to you being like, hey, want to catch up again? And the answer is no, thanks.
Okay.
So my answer is on date one, it's kind of like an audition, you know, or even a job interview. You don't necessarily need to treat it as such, but you can obviously, you know, word it how you like. But what you're really there to do is to say, this is what I'm looking for. What are you looking for? And once you've got that set up, if that person says, hey, I'm ready to be in a relationship, and then they act like they're not ready to be in a relationship over the next couple of dates, you know they're not relationship ready. So I think this boils down to a very important word, which is consistency. If they say on date one they're looking for a relationship and they're not consistent with their words, bye. I don't want to spend time with that person.
I think consistency is huge for every aspect of life. I don't want to lose this because Max over here, who is wonderful to us all the time and always responding to our stories and commenting, he's got a question over here. And how do you know if you are ready to begin a relationship?
I think that's a great question. I think there's a few parts to it too. I think I'll talk for myself. I'm at the stage now where just the idea of being with more than one person is exhausting to me. And I say that from the perspective of a few areas. One, I've done open relationships and I've done friends with benefits and I have juggled multiple guys. It is exhausting. I don't want to do it again. I actually really enjoy just having one partner who's consistent, who I can be loving with. I can have, you know, I can enjoy the benefits of a friend whilst also having the experience of a lover thrown on that too. So what do I attribute that to? I think it's gotten to a stage now where I've allowed myself to a stage where I'm no longer a perfectionist. I don't think, oh, this person doesn't look pretty enough. They're not attractive enough. I'll find someone else who's doing that, because that's just totally irrelevant. What I think also, I don't have this fear of, oh, what if the sex is bad and I want to move on, or I want to open the relationship up, because it just doesn't work like that. If the sex is bad, it means that neither of you are probably communicating or actually are allowing to build and grow together as a team. So it's less that the sex is bad and more of what's the challenge between the two of you in this dynamic. So I think that being relationship ready requires 3 things. You're at a stage where you're ready to be a much more open communicator and discuss your feelings. You are self-aware of what your wants and needs are. And also you're working as a team player.
That's wonderful. And I agree with all of that. So we have someone that just asked a really good question, which we're going to get to in just a moment. But I wanted to follow up on something that you just said about the sex being bad. Can sex between 2 people improve?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think a lot of people have this idea that if the sex is bad, the partner's bad. And it's like, no, not necessarily. Or they have this idea of, if my partner doesn't want to have sex with me, therefore I've done something wrong. And it's like, no, that person could just be tired. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are a bad partner in bed. I think the key thing to know with regards to sex is that it most definitely can improve. A key part of sex is to look at it less as you finishing in bed together, but rather as foreplay from the minute, you know, you touch your partner, you make them feel good, you know, being able to listen to your partner, being able to appreciate your partner by helping them with their day and actually being there and warm and tender with them, even if it's just, you know, hugging them or just massaging them, is actually proven to allow that partner to feel relaxed and to feel loved. And that then translates really nicely into actually making a partner much more, I don't want to say agreeable as if this is manipulation. What I mean to say is that it allows your partner to just feel much more accepting and also excited to be with you. In theory, of course. Like, I mean, that person obviously still wants to have, you know, still wants to do it as equally as you. You should never force anyone to do something they don't want to do.
Right.
But I think what it boils down to is thinking about how your interaction outside of bed can impact the performance in bed.
That's great. So that's really about intimacy and communication.
Absolutely. And I think to just add one last thing to that, one thing I always teach my clients too, and I've done this before myself, is to talk about what kind, like, you know, before you have sex with a partner, at least let them know what what you like and what you don't enjoy, because the worst time to do that is when you're in bed together. I think when you've got a clear picture as to what you like, works way better for both of you.
I get that. Now, is that something that should come up on a first date as well?
Great question. Well, I think my answer to that would be I don't recommend having sex on the first date, just because it's not something that I recommend for everyone, on the basis that if you do have sex on the first date, it's kind of like drinking on an empty stomach. So you can get flooded with like lots of oxytocin and become very attached to an individual without really getting to know them. So again, it goes back to that whole point of, if they said their relationship material on date one and you're having a great time having sex with them on the first night, then they ghost you, then you've kind of got to ask yourself, which is, what's the reason I chose to do this action when it probably wasn't healthy for me? That's why if you've measured that consistency out with a person and then sleep with them, and you've had this discussion about, like, what you like and what you don't like in bed, at least that way you know that you did your due diligence, and you're probably being more responsible for your own interaction too. I'm also just conscious of time too, because I noticed we've probably only got about 2 minutes left.
Oh, good to know. Okay. So, wow, 2 minutes. We're already at an hour almost.
Yeah, we are. Wow, that flew by.
All right. Here is something that I got from another reader, and I think it's a great question. Now, mindful of the time, in your experiences, can a throuple work, and what is needed to make it work? Now, let's first define this. A throuple is some sort of relationship between 3 partners. And here we're really talking about 3 men.
Correct. So I think to answer that question really succinctly, it does make it harder because you need to have everyone on the same page as you. And I think that you all need to be in agreement with one another. Can it work? Absolutely. But I think it's just harder work because you need to find someone who's willing and able to join the 3 of you in the same kind of experience that you're looking for. So it means you've all got to be much more sophisticated about what you're looking for. Do you cheat? Do you not? Sorry, what am I talking about? Do you cheat? Right. Do you open up to a 4th person? Do you allow for kids and family? What does this look like? So I think as long as everyone's on the same page as you, you can do it.
All right. I love that. So mindful of the time, I would say I want to sum up a lot of what you've been saying, and there's been some themes for sure. I think being upfront, being willing to let go of things, and to not linger and live in the fantasy realm for too long would be, for me, some takeaways from tonight. Is there anything that you would want to add, that you would want people to really know in their hearts and minds to move forward in the dating world?
Yes, the one thing I would like to say to everyone is that I think we spend far too much time up here trying to analyze what people are thinking, when we should actually be focusing more on how we feel in our gut and our internal central nervous system. I think once we focus more on how we feel, we're much better at making wiser decisions for ourselves in dating.
That is wonderful. So, Ken, you've been wonderful. I am so grateful for your time today, and I know everyone that's popped in is equally grateful. You've had so much insight, so many good nuggets of advice, and I just want to thank you for your time. And I would say, Ken, can you tell us your Instagram handle? I'll post it on the story as well, but just in case anyone wants to, follow you, see the kind of work you're doing, and just maybe even reach out to you, how would they do that?
Yep. So my handle is ken.reed_relationship.coach.
Okay, perfect. We will be sharing that as well, just in case you missed it. All right, thank you again. And everyone, enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you very much, Sean. See you later.
Thank you. Take care, guys.